The firewood wagon reached Lydia Barlow's gate just after noon, stopped with a groan of leather and iron, and then refused to come through. Lydia stood on the hard-packed yard with the paid receipt in one hand while the driver stared at the road instead of at her. Behind him, 2 full cords of split pine sat stacked beneath a canvas sheet, dry enough to burn tonight. Her woodshed held less than 2 days' worth. The frost that morning had stayed white in the shadows until nearly 10. "I paid Frank Talbot on Tuesday," Lydia said. The driver shifted on the wagon seat. "I know, Mrs. Barlow." "Then open the tailboard." "Can't." He pulled a folded paper from the breast of his coat and read it again, though Lydia could see he already knew what it said. "Mr. Talbot says I'm not to unload unless you acknowledge the Barlow passage." Lydia lowered the receipt. "The what?" "Old wagon passage, through your north meadow." "There is no wagon passage through my north meadow. Mr. Talbot says your husband allowed it." "My husband allowed his wagons across one spring when the county road washed out." Her voice stayed even. "That was 18 months before Thomas died." The driver rubbed his jaw. "I don't know anything about that." "Then you know enough not to call it a permanent road. I'm only carrying instructions, and I am only asking you to deliver wood I already bought." His eyes finally met hers. He looked embarrassed, which made Lydia angrier than insolence would have. A rude man could be answered. An embarrassed man wanted her to make his obedience comfortable. "There's another paper," he said. "Mr. Talbot says you can sign at the store. Once you do, deliveries continue same as before. Same as before would be you unloading that wood." The driver sighed. "Mrs. Barlow, I've got 2 more stops before dark." "Then you should not waste daylight holding another person's property." His mouth tightened. He glanced toward the north edge of the yard, where an old wagon track disappeared into buffalo grass before reaching Lydia's fence. Thomas had let Talbot's teams use that strip during a wet spring, when the main road had become a trough of mud. 3 weeks, perhaps 4, Lydia remembered meals gone cold while Thomas came in late from opening and closing the gate. She remembered asking once how long it would continue. Thomas had kissed the top of her head and said he had it handled. At the time, she had been grateful. Now the phrase tasted different. The driver climbed down to inspect a rut beside the front wheel before turning the team. As he crouched, the folded instruction slipped from his coat and landed near the wheel track. Lydia saw it. He did not. She said nothing. He climbed back up, gathered the reins, and gave her an apologetic nod. "You'll have to take it up with Mr. Talbot." "I intend to." The wagon turned in a wide arc. Lydia waited until the rear wheels cleared the gate, then bent and picked up the fallen paper. She did not unfold it yet. The wood was leaving. That mattered first. She watched 2 cords of paid winter heat roll toward Canyon Wells until the wagon disappeared past the low rise. Then she went to the woodshed. 16 split pieces remained along the back wall, plus kindling and a few lengths too green to trust. Lydia counted once. She did not count again. Numbers did not become kinder through repetition. Thomas's old splitting maul hung on 2 pegs beside the shed door. The ash handle had been painted blue years ago because Thomas kept losing it in tall grass. The paint was chipped now, especially where a hand had worn the shaft smooth. Lydia lifted it down. The head felt slightly loose, not dangerous yet. Soon, she carried it to the pile of weathered fence rails stacked behind the shed. They were ugly wood, full of knots, but dry enough. She set one on the chopping block and swung. The maul struck off-center and jarred both arms. Lydia reset her feet. Again, The second blow opened a pale crack through the grain. By the fifth rail, her palms burned inside her gloves. By the seventh, her shoulders had begun to tremble. She kept going. The sound carried farther than she realized. Across the boundary fence, Martin Dwyer had been checking a sagging stretch of wire for Juniper Gate Ranch when the uneven blows reached him. He listened through 3 more. Then he left his horse tied to a post and walked toward the Barlow place. Lydia heard his boots on the frozen ground and turned with the maul still in her hands. Martin stopped outside the gate. He was tall without using height as a performance, broad through the shoulders from work rather than vanity. His brown coat dusted along one sleeve from the fence line. He removed his hat. Mrs. Barlow, Mr. Dwyer. His gaze went to the split rails, then the nearly empty woodshed, then the road where Talbot's wagon had vanished. He did not ask whether she needed saving. Talbot turn around? He did. Lydia set the maul head against the block. He wants me to acknowledge a wagon passage through my land before he delivers wood I already paid for. Martin's face did not change much, but his attention sharpened. You sign anything? No. Good. Lydia's grip tightened. I did not ask whether it was good. Martin inclined his head once. Fair. He stayed outside the gate. That registered. Most men who came to a widow's place with a problem already had one boot across the threshold before they finished announcing themselves. Hard frost again tonight, he said. I know. You have enough inside for 2 nights? Lydia almost asked how he knew. Then she saw his glance toward the open shed. Less. Martin nodded toward the rails. You want help? I do not want charity. Wasn't offering it. What were you offering? He thought before answering. Trade. Lydia waited. Ransom's been complaining Talbot's supply loads don't arrive when they're supposed to. Wood, feed, small freight. You notice details. Better than some of our hands. That is a diplomatic way to insult your men. They'd survive. A faint dryness touched his voice. You help me inspect the next juniper loads. I help you split enough wood to get ahead of the cold. Lydia studied him. And if I say no, I go back to my fence. No offense, no persuasion, no wounded pride, just an answer. Lydia looked at the gate between them. Then she lifted the latch. Come through. Martin entered only after she stepped aside. He did not reach for Thomas's blue-handled maul. Instead, he crossed to his horse, returned with his own plain axe, and asked, Where do you want the next cord? Lydia pointed to the dry side of the shed. They worked until the light began thinning. Martin split the heavy rounds. Lydia broke smaller pieces and stacked them herself. He never told her to sit down. Once, when her left glove slipped, he paused and waited until she fixed it before swinging again. By dusk, they had nearly doubled what remained under cover. Martin set his axe against the shed wall. Tomorrow morning? For the juniper inspection? For both, if you still want the trade. Lydia nodded. First light. I'll be here. He picked up his axe and left through the gate, closing it behind him. Only after he was gone did Lydia remember the folded paper in her apron pocket. She carried it inside, lit the lamp, and opened it on the kitchen table. Talbot Mercantile and Feed appeared at the top. Beneath that, in Frank Talbot's hard business hand, were 6 words. No und Barlow passage first. Lydia read them twice. Then she turned the paper over. On the back, someone had penciled a shorter note beside a freight figure. Naught moot to Juniper, save half day. Lydia sat very still. Frank did not want an old courtesy remembered. He wanted her land built into his business. And by withholding winter wood she had already paid for, he had decided she would be easier to convince cold. By first light, Lydia had decided that Frank Talbot's 6 words mattered more than the 2 cords of wood he had taken back to Canyon Wells. The cold was still a problem. She could solve cold with labor. A merchant writing her land into his freight plans without permission was another matter. She had slept poorly, waking twice to feed the stove and once to read the dropped instruction again by lamplight. No unned, Barlow passage first. On the back, Mokboot to Juniper, save half day. She had folded the paper and put it beneath her paid receipt on the kitchen table before dawn. When the first clean stripe of sun reached the eastern ridge, Martin Dwyer was already coming through the pasture toward her gate with his axe over one shoulder. Not early, not late, Lydia noticed, because men who made promises often expected gratitude for remembering them. Martin merely arrived. He stopped outside the gate. Morning, morning. His gaze dropped to her gloved hands. Saw. Some. Want to stop splitting? No. Then we don't. Lydia lifted the latch. Martin entered after she stepped aside. They worked while frost still silvered the shaded ground. Martin took the thick rounds. Lydia split rails and stacked the pieces under cover. He did not reach for the blue-handled maul, though it leaned only a few feet from him. Twice he shifted wood farther inside the shed, where blowing weather would not reach it. Neither time did he announce what he was doing. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, warmth had worked beneath Lydia's coat despite the cold. Martin drove his axe into a knot and freed it with one practiced twist. This side full enough? He asked. Lydia checked the stack. Another arm's width. He nodded and moved the next pieces there. Simple. No argument. No man explaining to her how her own woodshed should be arranged. Lydia watched him lift another round onto the block. The thought escaped before she had time to decide whether she wanted it spoken. If only I'd met you sooner. Martin stopped with both hands on the axe handle. He did not smile. He did not step toward her. He only waited. Heat rose unexpectedly into Lydia's face. I did not mean. She looked toward the shed rather than at him. I meant before I learned to wonder what every kindness costs. Martin studied the wood at his boots. That sounds expensive. Lydia gave a short breath that was almost a laugh. It has been. He could have asked about Thomas, about widowhood, about whatever man had taught her that help carried a hidden account. Instead, he lifted the next round. Where do you want this cord? The restraint struck harder than sympathy would have. Lydia pointed. Back wall. All right. They finished enough wood to carry her well past the next several nights. Martin drank from the dipper she offered, thanked her, and returned the cup without letting his fingers brush hers. Juniper load came in before dawn, he said. Feed and stove wood. Ransom's waiting if you still want the trade. I said I would. I know. An hour later, Lydia rode across the adjoining boundary to Juniper Gate Ranch. The place was already awake, with the ordinary noise of cattle, tack, wagon wheels, and men calling short instructions across the yard. Martin had gone ahead to finish morning work and met her outside a low stores building near the foreman's office. Mr. Ransom was not there yet. Loads inside, Martin said. Talbot driver left the sheets. Lydia tied her mare and followed him. She did not begin with the paper. She began with the wood. 2 stacked rows filled the rear of the shed. Lydia paced the length, measured the height against her own shoulder, then crouched to inspect how tightly the pieces had been thrown together. Talbot called that a full cord? Martin asked. The sheet says 1 cord. Yes. Then either his driver stacks with remarkable generosity toward empty air, or you received less. Martin's mouth moved. How much less? Enough that I would not pay the description without asking. She crossed to the feed sacks. 12 were listed. 12 were present, seals intact. No mystery there. Lydia approved them immediately. Martin noticed. You trust those? I trust what I can count. Fair. On the next delivery sheet, freight timing caught her attention. Talbot had marked an estimated route time from Canyon Wells to Juniper Gate that was shorter than the established wagon road could reasonably allow for a loaded team. Lydia read it twice. How long does one of his freight wagons usually take from town? Depends on weight. 2 hours or better by the road. And this says, Martin leaned beside her without touching the paper. 1.25 hours. Lydia traced the penciled notation beneath it. Barlow cut through. Martin went still. You knew about that? She asked. No. You have never sent juniper wagons through my north meadow. Not since I've been foreman. How long? 4 years. Lydia looked at him. Thomas allowed Talbot through once. Spring before last, before he died. The main road washed badly along the low stretch east of Canyon Wells. Frank asked for passage until it dried. How long? 3 weeks, maybe 4. Martin frowned at the delivery sheet. Temporary. That was what Thomas told me. She heard the weakness in the sentence as soon as she said it. What Thomas told me, not what she had read, not what she had signed. Martin did not seize on it. You ever agree to anything after Thomas died? No. Frank asked. Not until yesterday. Lydia turned the sheet over. The freight calculations on the back were rough, but their meaning was clear enough. Shorter route, less team time, more loads in a day. Martin read only what she pointed to. If Talbot could use your meadow whenever he wanted, he said, he'd save a fair piece of haul time reaching Juniper. Half a day, according to his instruction. That's too much for one trip. Perhaps he means over several loads. Lydia took the pencil lying beside the ledger and copied the route notation onto a scrap with the date and delivery description. When she reached for the pencil again, Martin reached at the same time. Their fingers touched, barely. A dry warmth against the back of her knuckle. Martin released the pencil at once. Lydia's hand remained suspended above the table for a fraction longer than necessary. Sorry, he said. You did nothing. He stepped back enough to give her room. Lydia finished copying the notation. Mr. Ransom arrived shortly afterward, listened while she explained the short wood load and approved feed sacks, then swore under his breath at the discrepancy in volume. Talbot been shaving deliveries, he asked. I did not say that. Lydia straightened. I said this load does not match the description. One poor load can be carelessness. I would inspect the next before deciding what it means. Ransom nodded slowly. You're particular. That is why Martin offered the trade. Martin said. I said she noticed details, same thing. Lydia folded her copied note and tucked it inside her coat. Before she left, she looked once more at the penciled words, Barlow cut through. The driver's dropped instruction had made Frank's intention plain. This sheet made it worse. His current freight planning already assumed a route across land. Lydia had never granted him. The question was no longer whether Frank wanted her signature. It was why his business had begun behaving as though he already possessed it. Lydia rode into Canyon Wells 2 mornings later, with Frank Talbot's dropped instruction folded inside her coat, her paid firewood receipt tucked beside it, and a clean copy of the Juniper Gate route notation in her saddlebag. She had considered waiting. Waiting would have been easier on her hands, easier on the woodpile, easier on the small knot of unease that had followed her since she read Barlow cut through on a delivery sheet that had nothing to do with her. She rode anyway. Talbot Mercantile stood near the center of town, its front windows crowded with flour tins, lamp chimneys, harness buckles, and winter gloves. A wagon waited at the loading platform behind the building. Lydia tied her mare at the rail and went inside. Frank Talbot saw her before the young clerk did. He was a broad man nearing 50, dressed better than most of his customers without looking foolish for it. His watch chain caught the light when he came around the counter. Mrs. Barlow. Mr. Talbot. His smile was measured. I expected you yesterday. I had wood to split. The smile weakened. Unnecessary work, if you ask me. I did not. Evan, the young clerk, lowered his head over a stack of invoices. Frank motioned toward the small office behind the counter. We can speak privately. Lydia went in because the question was hers, not because he had invited her. Frank left the door open. He sat behind the desk. Lydia remained standing. You withheld firewood I had already paid for, she said. Frank folded his hands over his waistcoat. The wood is yours. Then send it. I will, as soon as we settle the passage matter. Lydia took the dropped instruction from her coat and placed it on his desk. His eyes paused on it. Your driver lost this. He should take better care of. Business papers. Your paper says no unload until I acknowledge the Barlow passage. Yes, there is no permanent Barlow passage. Frank leaned back. Your husband and I had an understanding. Thomas allowed your wagons through during one washed-out spring. Repeated use matters. 3 weeks is repeated use if a man counts fast enough. Frank's mouth tightened. Lydia continued. Show me the agreement. What agreement? The one giving you permanent passage across my north meadow. Not every arrangement between neighbors requires a lawyer's language. Then you do not have one. Frank opened a drawer and removed a folded document. I have this. Lydia did not reach for it. What is it? A practical solution. He unfolded the sheet and turned it toward her. The writing was recent. Lydia knew that before reading a word. The ink was dark, the paper clean, the hand too fresh to belong to anything Thomas had signed before his death. This is a new agreement, a clarification. It is dated this week, which avoids any uncertainty left by older arrangements. Lydia read enough to understand the shape of it. Frank Talbot and his hired wagons would have continued passage along the north boundary of Barlow Place for freight serving Juniper Gate and other holdings beyond. The words were polite. The result was not. How often? She asked. As need whom? My business. How many wagons depends on the season. What happens when cattle are in that meadow? Frank's patience thinned. Mrs. Barlow, this is a wagon track, not a railroad. Then it should be simple to answer. He tapped the paper. You sign. I send your wood this afternoon. Feed and household deliveries continue at ordinary rates. I can also make your winter freight easier than most widows manage alone. Lydia raised her eyes. You are offering to make it easier for me, to buy from you if I give you permanent use of my land. I am offering neighborly terms. With my paid firewood sitting on your wagon. Frank's face hardened by a degree. Independent hauling from Volsenberg will cost you more. Considerably more once the roads harden and snow begins. Then I will consider it. You have a small place, Mrs. Barlow. I know its size. Winter is not kind to pride. Neither is commerce. Frank leaned forward. Thomas understood that an arrangement can benefit both sides. Then show me what Thomas signed. I told you, we had an understanding. Behind them, Evan shifted a box near the counter. Frank glanced toward the open office door. Lydia did too. Evan avoided both their eyes. Mr. Barlow sent the old draft back. Frank rose so fast the desk chair scraped. Evan, the clerk went pale. I only meant. You meant to finish sorting invoices. Evan swallowed. Yes, sir. Lydia turned back to Frank. Old draft. Irrelevant. You said there was no need for lawyer's language. There wasn't. Then why was there a draft? Frank's jaw worked once. Because Thomas liked things written down. Did he sign it? We discussed terms. That is not what I asked. Frank pulled the current sheet toward him. You are making this needlessly difficult. No. I am making it difficult for you to call a temporary favor permanent. For the first time, real irritation showed in his face. Your husband was more practical. Lydia felt the sentence strike where he intended. She let it pass through her without giving him the satisfaction of seeing where it landed. My husband is dead. I am the person standing here. She pushed the new draft back across the desk. I will not sign this. Frank stared at her. Then Talbot wagons do not cross your property. Good, and they do not deliver there either. That is your choice. You will find choices have costs, so do bad assumptions. Lydia reached for the dropped instruction. Frank put 2 fingers on the fresh draft. Take this with you. Why? Read it when you are less angry. I am not angry enough to become careless. Take it anyway. He folded it and extended it. Lydia considered refusing, then changed her mind. A written proposal was better in her possession than in his description. She took it. This does not mean I am reconsidering. Of course not. His tone said he expected time and cold to reconsider for her. Lydia placed the draft inside her coat with the other papers and walked out. Martin Dwyer stood near the front counter with a coil of rope under one arm and a sack of horseshoe nails in the other hand. Lydia had not seen him when she entered. He gave no sign that he had heard more than his business required. Frank followed her from the office. Dwyer. Martin inclined his head. Talbot. Juniper Gate planning to involve itself in Mrs. Barlow's private affairs. Not that I know of. Frank looked at Lydia. You brought him into this? No, but I have a question for him. Martin set the nails on the counter. Ask. Lydia took her copied Juniper notation from the saddlebag paper she had brought inside and unfolded it. Has Juniper Gate ever authorized Talbot Mercantile to use Barlow Place as its contracted freight route? Martin answered without hesitation. No. Frank's voice sharpened. You do not speak for Ransom. I speak for the routes I approve as foreman. Mind ranch business. Martin glanced at the copied notation. This is ranch business. Frank's eyes narrowed. Your employer saves time if my wagons use that cut-through. Likely. Lydia turned to Martin. How much? Depends on load and road. Enough to matter over a season. She absorbed that. Juniper Gate benefited. Martin benefited indirectly because smoother freight made his work easier. Mr. Ransom benefited in money. Yet Martin had never once suggested she open the road. Do you want it? She asked. Frank gave a small, humorless laugh. Of course he does. Martin ignored him. Not if you don't. The simplicity of it unsettled Lydia more than persuasion would have. Frank stepped closer to the counter. You both seem determined to make business personal. Lydia folded the copied notation. You withheld my paid wood to obtain my land. It was personal when I arrived. She left before he could answer. Outside, the mare sidestepped as a freight wagon rattled past. Lydia caught the saddle horn, but Martin had followed only as far as the walkway. He did not grab her waist or take her reins. He held out one open hand. Lydia looked at it, then at him. May I? He asked. She placed her gloved hand in his. His grip was firm enough to steady, nothing more. Lydia stepped into the stirrup and mounted. Martin released her at once. You heard Evan? She asked. Enough to know there was an old draft. not whether Thomas signed it. No, Lydia tucked the current agreement safely inside her coat. Then that is what I need to find. Martin nodded toward Talbot Mercantile. And if Frank already has what he needs, then he would not need my signature now. Martin's eyes sharpened. Lydia turned her mare toward home. Behind her, Talbot's fresh right-of-way draft rested against the old instruction in her coat. One demanded recognition. The other asked for permission. Frank wanted people to believe there was no difference. Lydia intended to find out why. By the next afternoon, Lydia had found 3 different ways. Talbot's deliveries cost Juniper Gate more than the sheets admitted. None of them required complicated arithmetic. A stack of stove wood, described as a full cord, fell short when she paced its length and height. 2 feed deliveries had arrived far enough apart that the ranch had been forced to buy extra locally between them. A freight charge assumed a route time that only made sense if Talbot's wagons crossed her north meadow. Lydia stood in the Juniper Stores building, with her gloves tucked beneath one arm and 3 delivery sheets spread on a barrel head. Martin waited across from her, saying nothing while she checked the last figures. "This is not all dishonesty," she said. "I did not say it was. The feed sacks match, yes. The hardware shipment matches, yes. The wood does not." Martin folded his arms. "And the timing, bad enough to cost the ranch twice." She tapped one date with her forefinger. Talbot delivered feed on a Monday, then missed the next expected load by 4 days. Juniper had to buy from another supplier in between, at a worse price, because you needed it immediately. Exactly. Lydia moved to the freight notation. Then his later charges assume the shorter haul again. "Across your place. Across my place." Martin's mouth flattened. Ransom needs to see this. He needs to see the delivery pattern, not hear that Frank is stealing from him. "You think I'd say that? I think men become confident faster than facts do." Martin gave her a dry look. "That sounds aimed at me. If it fits." The door opened before he could answer. Mr. Ransom entered carrying a pair of work gloves and a coffee cup gone cold. He was grey-haired, square through the shoulders, and had spent enough years around cattle to move without wasting motion. "Dwyer says you found something," Martin answered before Lydia could. "Mrs. Barlow found 3 things worth checking. Not widow, not neighbor, her name and her work." Lydia noticed that too. Ransom set down the cup. "Show me." Lydia did. She walked him through the wood volume first, because it was easiest to see. Then the gap between feed loads, then the freight timing. Ransom frowned at the last sheet. "Talbot's been billing us like he's taking the Barlow cut-through. That is what the time suggests," Lydia said. "Did Thomas ever give him that road? Temporary passage during a spring washout. I know of nothing permanent." Ransom rubbed his thumb over his lower lip. "Would save us money if it were permanent." Lydia met his eyes. "I know, but it isn't mine to offer." The answer came without hesitation. Some of the tension left her shoulders. "No, you worried I'd press you. I considered the possibility." Ransom glanced at Martin. "Dwyer would have argued with me," Martin said. "Probably. He usually does when he thinks I'm wrong." Ransom looked back to Lydia. "Good thing for me he isn't owner." Lydia almost smiled. Ransom gathered the sheets. "I want the next 3 Talbot deliveries checked the same way. Martin and I had a trade. That trade was for his labor against your time. This is my ranch." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small coin purse. "I pay for work that saves me money." Lydia hesitated only long enough to decide whether pride was being mistaken for independence. It was not charity. "Then pay me for the hours I work." "Done." and I decide what I can prove before anyone confronts Talbot." Ransom's eyebrows rose. "Dwyer said you were particular." He was being polite. Dangerous habit. Ransom nodded toward the sheets. "Start tomorrow morning. 2 hours. We'll see from there." Lydia accepted. Paid work mattered for more than the money. Frank Talbot had tried to make winter supplies dependent on surrendering her land. Juniper Gate had just offered her a way to earn without giving anyone a road through her meadow. When she stepped outside, Martin followed with the empty coffee cup. Ransom had forgotten. "You seem pleased," he said. "I am considering whether I should charge him extra for insulting my manners." "He'd pay it if you caught another short cord." Lydia looked toward the ranch yard. "You knew he might hire me." "I thought he might." "You did not tell him to?" "No." "Why not?" Martin gave her a puzzled glance. "Because you were standing right there." The answer should not have mattered as much as it did. Lydia turned toward her mare before he could see that it had. Martin's gaze went instead to the blue-handled maul, tied beneath the saddle blanket, where Lydia had carried it over to split a small load of kindling after finishing the inspection. "Head still loose?" he asked. "A little worse. May I fix it?" Lydia rested one hand on the saddle. "Fix the head." "All right. Do not sand the handle. Wasn't planning to." "Do not repaint it." Martin's mouth moved. "I'm fixing the head, Lydia, not raising it as my own child." She stared at him. It was the first time he had used her given name. He seemed to realize it a second later. Neither apologized. Lydia untied the maul and handed it over. "Bring it back today. Before supper. Not tomorrow. Before supper." He carried it across both palms rather than by the handle, as though receiving something loaned rather than claiming a tool. Lydia rode home alone. Martin returned less than 2 hours later with the maul balanced across one hand. The wedge was reset. The head sat tight against the wood. The chipped blue paint remained exactly as she had left it. "Try it," he said. Lydia took the handle. Martin kept his hand beneath the head until she had the weight. Their hands met around the worn ash. Not accidental this time, though neither had reached for the other. His fingers rested against hers for one breath. Lydia could feel the warmth of him through the cold handle. Martin did not close his hand. He waited. Lydia shifted the maul fully into her grip, and he let go. "Better?" he asked. She tested the head with her thumb. "Much." Martin glanced at the blue paint. "Thomas do that?" "Yes. Practical. Embarrassing, according to him." Lydia leaned the maul against the porch post. "He lost it twice in tall grass one summer. After the second time, he painted the handle blue so he could see it. Worked. Usually. The memory came with less pain than it once had. Not because Thomas mattered less, because grief had stopped requiring every memory to hurt in order to prove it was real. He was good at solving things after they happened, Lydia said. Martin stayed beside the bottom porch step. Most of us are. He handled business that way too. If a problem came, he took care of it. If I asked what it was, he often said there was nothing I needed to trouble myself over. You liked that? Sometimes. Lydia folded her arms against the cold. Until he died. Then I discovered being spared from trouble and being prepared for it were not the same thing. Martin looked toward the north meadow. A man can mean well and still leave somebody carrying the consequence. Lydia studied him. Do you believe that because of Thomas? No, because of yourself. His jaw tightened faintly. Sometimes. Before she could ask more, hoofbeats sounded on the road. A boy from Canyon Wells rode up on a bay pony, cheeks red from the cold. Mrs. Barlow? Yes. Mr. Talbot said, this was for you. He handed down an envelope, accepted Lydia's thanks, and turned back toward town. Martin stayed where he was. Lydia broke the seal herself. Frank's message was brief. Talbot Mercantile would honor no further deliveries to Barlow Place after the first week of November, unless Lydia signed the proposed passage agreement. Beneath that, in the same measured hand, Frank wrote that Thomas Barlow had previously recognized Talbot's use of the route, and that Lydia's refusal merely disrupted an established arrangement. She read it twice. Then she handed the page to Martin, only because she chose to. His eyes stopped on the last sentence. "What?" Lydia asked. Martin tapped the paper once. "This. Thomas recognizing the route. The way Frank phrases it." "What about it?" Martin's face had gone still. "I've seen people turn temporary permission into something bigger by talking as if everyone already agreed." Lydia looked toward the north meadow, where old wagon marks faded into grass before reaching the fence. "Where?" "In my family." He handed the note back. "And if Talbot is doing what I think he is, the road isn't the only thing he expects you to surrender." Martin did not explain until the next morning, after Lydia finished 2 paid hours, checking Juniper Gate's incoming stores, and Mr. Ransom had gone to speak with a cattle buyer near the South Pens. She found him behind the foreman's office, replacing a cracked trace strap on a supply wagon. The cold had hardened the mud into ridges beneath the wheels. Lydia stopped several feet away. "You said Frank's wording reminded you of your family." Martin pulled the leather through the buckle and tested it once before answering. "My mother's brother had 40 acres outside Pueblo County when I was younger. Hay ground, a few cattle, enough to keep himself if the weather behaved. And someone wanted a road through it? Not a road at first." Martin set the strap across the wagon tongue. A neighbor asked to move cattle across one corner because his usual trail flooded. Uncle Caleb agreed, said it was temporary. Lydia already knew where the story was going. How temporary? 1 season. Martin rubbed his thumb over a worn place in the leather. Then another drive used it. Then another. Folks started calling it the Miller Trail, like the name itself proved something. Caleb objected. They told him everybody knew the arrangement had been settled years ago. Was it? No paper I ever saw. What happened? He spent money fighting with neighbors instead of fixing fences, lost hay to trampled ground. Then he borrowed against the place after a bad winter. Martin's voice stayed controlled, but the control had weight. By the time I understood how much trouble he was in, I sent money. Too late to matter. Did he lose the land? Most of it. Sold under pressure. Kept enough for a house and a small patch. Lydia watched him. "And you decided that was your failure?" Martin gave her a glance. "Partly. Why? Because I knew he was proud. I knew he would not ask until things were bad. I waited for him to ask anyway." Lydia folded her arms. "That sounds like his decision." "Doesn't mean I like mine. No." She stepped closer to the wagon. "But if you start treating my North Meadow like your uncle's 40 acres, you will make decisions for the wrong woman." Martin's mouth tightened. "I know. Do you? I'm trying to." Lydia let that answer stand. She did not need him perfect. She needed him alert to the place where strength became interference. "Juniper benefits if Frank gets the route," she said. "Yes, you benefit too. Less trouble receiving freight." "Yes." "Mr. Ransom benefits." "Yes. So why haven't either of you asked me for it?" Martin leaned one hand on the wagon wheel. "Because saving time isn't the same as owning the road." Lydia studied him for a beat. "Good answer. Glad I had one, Mr. Ransom returned before noon and found Lydia comparing the actual weight and condition of 2 salt sacks against the delivery sheet. She finished before raising the question. Frank had permanent passage across my north meadow. How much would Juniper save? Ransom did not pretend ignorance. Depends on season. More when the east road cuts up, some on every heavy load. Would you like the passage? For the ranch? Sure. Martin went still near the doorway. Lydia kept her attention on Ransom. Do you expect me to grant it? Ransom's grey brows rose. No, even if refusing costs Juniper money. My freight bill is my problem. He picked up the salt sheet and glanced at her marks. Your land is yours. Lydia nodded once. Thank you, Ransom snorted. Don't thank me for understanding a fence. He tapped the sheet. You caught another short wait. One sack is light enough to check again before I approve the load. Do it. He turned toward Martin. And Dwyer? Yes. Stop looking like somebody asked you to choose between the ranch and a hanging. Martin's expression barely moved. I'm not. You are. Lydia left them to argue and carried her copied notes back toward the store's building. She had gone only a few steps when Ransom called after her. Mrs. Barlow, she turned. Harper Place south of Canyon Wells uses Talbot freight too. Henry complained last month that Talbot kept changing delivery terms depending on which road was passable. Might be nothing. Might tell you whether this Barlow business is unique. Lydia considered it. Did he ask you to send anyone? No. Then I will ask him whether he wants to speak before I ask about anything else. Ransom nodded. That's why I told you instead of Dwyer, Martin said. I heard that. Good. By mid-afternoon, Lydia and Martin were riding south along the rutted track toward the Harper place. She had not asked him to come until they were saddling. He had not assumed. The distinction felt increasingly important. The Harpers lived on a modest holding with 6 milk cows, a weathered hay shed, and a kitchen warm enough to fog Lydia's spectacles when she stepped inside. Mrs. Harper recognized her from church gatherings and poured coffee before anyone mentioned business. Henry Harper listened with his hands wrapped around his cup, while Lydia explained why she had come. I am not asking for your papers, she said, and I am not asking you to accuse Frank Talbot of anything. Mr. Ransom said, your freight terms changed recently. If you would rather not discuss it, we leave. Henry glanced at Martin. Juniper looking to squeeze Talbot. Martin shook his head. Not through you, Lydia added. This is about whether Frank's method with me is unusual. Mrs. Harper looked at her husband. Tell her. Henry sighed. Talbot used to bring feed straight by the east road. Last spring, he said, if weather turned it bad, we'd need to accept storage at his place until the road dried or pay extra for a different hauler. Did you? Lydia asked. Once. Cost more than I liked. Anything involving access across your land? No. Then this is not the same problem. Henry seemed surprised. You sound disappointed. I would be disappointed if I wanted a story more than the truth. Mrs. Harper gave Lydia a long, approving look. Henry rubbed one thumb along the cup rim. There is one thing. Lydia waited. Talbot likes arrangements that make leaving him difficult. Freight, storage, credit, whatever fits. He'll make the first favor cheap, the second one useful. By the third, folks act like there never was another way. Martin's posture changed beside the stove. Lydia heard the connection too. Did he ever say that plainly? No, Frank doesn't say ugly things plainly. Then I will not repeat it as fact. Henry nodded. Fair enough. Mrs. Harper leaned forward. You heard about Samuel Price. Lydia's attention sharpened. No, worked for Talbot before Evan. Kept old correspondence, drafts. Things Frank thought took too much room. Where is he now? Not sure. Walsenburg, maybe west of it with his daughter. Martin did not speak. Lydia asked, why do you think he kept old papers? because he argued with Frank over throwing things away. Everyone heard that much. Do you know whether he handled Thomas Barlow's business? No. Lydia absorbed the limit, a lead, nothing more. When they stepped outside, the afternoon light had flattened gold over the dry grass. Martin untied the horses. You got your wider pattern. Not the one I expected. Better. Why? Because you're not trying to make Frank guilty of everything. Lydia looked at him. You sound relieved. I am. Why? Because if I'm going to stand beside you, I'd rather stand beside the truth than anger. The words landed deeper than she wanted them to. Martin reached for his reins. Lydia caught his wrist before he could mount. He went still. Her fingers rested over the warm pulse beneath his sleeve. Do not stand beside me because of your uncle, she said. I won't. Do not turn me into a second chance to fix what happened to him. His eyes held hers. I'll try not to. Lydia released him. The contact had lasted only seconds, but it had not been accidental. She knew that, so did he. Neither pretended otherwise. On the ride home, they spoke little, until Canyon Wells came into view in the distance. A boy from Talbot's store was waiting near the road junction with a folded note for Martin. Evan had written only 2 lines. Samuel Price had handled old Talbot correspondence. Someone said he was staying west of Walsenburg. Lydia folded the message after Martin handed it to her. Frank's threat had begun with a road across her land. Now, the unanswered question had narrowed to 1 missing paper and 1 former clerk. Somewhere beyond Canyon Wells, a man named Samuel Price might know whether Thomas Barlow had ever agreed to give Frank Talbot anything more than temporary passage. Samuel Price's name stayed with Lydia all the way home. By supper, it had become a question she could no longer leave unanswered. If he had handled Talbot's old correspondence, then somewhere between Frank's claim of an understanding and Thomas's habit of keeping business troubles to himself, there might still be a piece of paper that showed what had actually been proposed. Lydia ate standing at the kitchen table, then carried down the wooden correspondence box Thomas had kept on the top shelf of the bedroom cupboard. Martin arrived after dark because she had asked him to. He stopped at the gate as usual, and Lydia opened it herself. You found something? He asked when he came inside. Not yet. She set the box on the table. But I know where Thomas kept papers he did not consider important enough for the tin box. Martin removed his coat and hung it by the door. He did not sit until she pointed to the chair opposite hers. The box smelled faintly of dust and old tobacco, though Thomas had never smoked much inside. Lydia lifted the lid. Receipts, seed catalog pages, a letter from a cousin in Kansas, an old road sketch drawn in Thomas's hand during the spring washout 18 months before his death. Lydia spread it flat. The main road east of Canyon Wells was marked with a thick pencil line. A washed section had been crossed out. Another line cut north through Barlow Place and joined the track toward Juniper Gate. Martin leaned closer. That's the route Talbot used for those few weeks. Lydia tapped the north meadow. Thomas opened the fence here and closed it again when the road dried. Yes, you remember that. I remember the gate being chained again. I remember Thomas complaining about wagon ruts in the grass. She searched another bundle. What I do not remember is anyone asking me whether that road should become permanent. Martin's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. Lydia found 3 notes tied together with string. One was a feed order. One concerned a broken wagon wheel. The third made her pause. Thomas's handwriting ran across half a page in his hurried business hand. Frank's proposed permanent road is too broad as written. Need to speak with Price about the South Line and whether Talbot means all freight or only juniper loads. Lydia read it twice. Martin waited. What? He asked. She handed him the page. He read only the lines in front of him. So Frank did propose permanence. Yes. Lydia sat back. And Thomas knew it. Doesn't say he agreed. No. Doesn't say he refused either. No. Lydia looked down at the road sketch. The worst answer would have been simple betrayal. Thomas giving away use of her land without telling her. But the paper did not prove that. Instead, it gave her something more difficult. He had been deciding whether to alter the future of Barlow Place and had never thought she needed to be part of the discussion. He did this all the time, she said. Not roads, decisions. Martin folded the note along its old crease and returned it. You said he thought he was sparing you. He did. Lydia placed the note beside the sketch. That is what makes anger so inconvenient. He was not cruel. If he had been cruel, I could put him in one corner of my memory and leave him there. Martin rested his forearms on his knees. People would be easier if they were only one thing. Thomas loved me. I believe you. And he still thought the ugly parts of life belonged to him. Lydia rubbed one thumb over the edge of the road. Sketch. Now Frank walks into that empty place as if Thomas left him permission instead of questions. Martin said, Maybe Thomas meant to tell you. Lydia gave him a level glance. Do not rescue a dead man from consequences he earned. Martin accepted that with a nod. Fair. She returned to the box. Beneath a stack of folded correspondence, Lydia found a small envelope with no letter inside. On the front, Thomas had written, S. Price. Ask about Talbot Road draft. Martin's attention sharpened. Samuel. Yes, that puts him directly in it. It puts his name near it. Lydia corrected. Not the same thing. Martin's mouth shifted. You're right. Lydia placed the envelope with Thomas's note. These stay here. Of course. The whole box stays here. I heard you. The stove settled low behind her. Lydia stood. I need more kindling before that fire goes down. I can get it. I have legs. Martin raised both hands. Also heard. She carried the wood bucket outside herself. The night had turned brittle, the stars sharp over the dark line of Juniper Gate's pasture. Lydia crossed to the shed, filled the bucket, and returned within minutes. Martin was where she had left him. The correspondence box remained open. Nothing had moved that she could see. He had shifted only enough to add one log to the stove after she came in and nodded toward it. Lydia banked the fire and sat again. Samuel Price may tell us what the draft said. Martin looked at Thomas's envelope. If he still has anything, and if he is willing to speak. You want me to find him? Lydia considered. Find out where he is. Nothing more. No questions. Not in my name. Martin's face went still for the briefest instant. All right. If he has old correspondence, he decides whether to show it. If he remembers Thomas, I ask him what he remembers. Understood. Lydia tied the 3 relevant papers together and returned the rest to the box. The room had grown warmer, outside. Wind brushed dry grass against the house siding with a soft rasp. Martin's hand rested on the table near hers, palm down at first, then turned slowly upward. He did not reach. Lydia stared at the open hand. After the past week, she knew enough about him to understand what he was doing. Offering. Waiting, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers. Warm, rough, steady, no urgency. Lydia felt the small scars along his knuckles, the callus beneath his thumb. Martin's thumb moved once over the back of her hand and stopped there, giving her the chance to decide what came next. Lydia did not move away. You are thinking too hard, she said. Usually gets me in trouble. I had noticed about Samuel About you." The honesty landed without flourish. Lydia's breath changed. Martin did not squeeze harder. He did not pull her closer. He simply sat across from her with their joined hands between them. Lydia leaned forward a little. So did he. The distance narrowed until she could see the faint line of a scar near his jaw and feel the warmth of his breath. Martin's eyes dropped to her mouth, then returned to hers. Lydia knew he would kiss her if she asked. That certainty was almost enough to make her do it, almost. She drew back first. "Not yet." Martin released her hand immediately. "All right." No disappointment sharpened his voice. No persuasion followed. Lydia gathered the tied papers and placed them back inside the box. "Tomorrow we find out whether Samuel Price is still near Wolzenberg." Martin stood and put on his coat. "I'll ask, without making noise, and without speaking for me." "Yes." Lydia walked him to the door. He left before the hour grew improper and headed across the dark pasture toward the juniper Foreman cottage. Halfway there, a ranch rider came in from the south and called his name. Martin stopped. The man had spent the day moving cattle near the road west of Wolzenberg. "You were asking after an old clerk," he said. "Samuel Price." Martin nodded. "He's staying with his daughter west of town, but not for long. Heard she's taking him north to Pueblo before the end of the week." Martin looked back toward Lydia's dark house beyond the fence. Tomorrow might be too late. That thought came fast. Too familiar, too persuasive. He should have ridden back and asked her. Instead, he went inside the Foreman cottage, lit the lamp, and took out paper. "Samuel Price," he wrote. "Mrs. Barlow is challenging Frank Talbot's claim of permanent passage across Barlow Place. If you handled Thomas Barlow's road correspondence, please wait before leaving Wolzenberg. I will see that Mrs. Barlow receives your answer. Martin Dwyer." He read it once, then he folded it, sealed it, and handed it to the ranch rider before good sense could catch up with fear. Samuel Price's reply arrived addressed to Lydia, and the first line told her Martin had done precisely what she had asked him not to do. She was at the kitchen table, sorting the notes from Thomas's correspondence box, when a juniper gate rider stopped at her gate and handed over a folded letter. The paper bore her name in an unfamiliar hand. Lydia thanked him, broke the seal, and read, "Mrs. Barlow, Mr. Dwyer writes that you are challenging Mr. Talbot's claim of permanent passage across Barlow Place and wish to know what I remember of Thomas Barlow's road correspondence. I do remember an old draft concerning that road. I had intended to leave for Pueblo with my daughter this week, but I can remain 2 more days if you wish to speak with me directly. Samuel Price." Lydia read the first sentence again, not because it was unclear, because it was painfully clear. "Mr. Dwyer writes that you are challenging." He had used her name. He had described her position. He had made Samuel believe Martin carried her authority. The letter contained the best news they had found so far. An old draft existed, or Samuel remembered one well enough to say so. Yet Lydia felt no relief. She folded the letter once and put it on the table beside Thomas's empty envelope marked S. Price. Then she walked across the frozen ground toward Juniper Gate. Martin saw her coming before she reached the foreman's office. One look at the letter in her hand stopped him where he stood. He dismissed the ranch hand beside him with a nod and came only as far as the porch edge. Samuel answered, "Yes." Lydia held up the paper. "He thanked me for asking you to contact him." Martin's face changed, not surprise. Guilt. "Lydia, did I ask you to write him?" "No." "Did I ask you to tell him I was challenging Frank's claim?" "No." "Did I give you permission to use my name?" "No." Martin's answers came without delay. That made the anger cleaner, not smaller. Lydia stepped onto the porch. Then why did you? He looked past her toward the boundary fence, jaw tight. A rider came in after I left your place. He said Samuel might leave for Pueblo before the end of the week, and I thought if we waited until morning, we might miss him. So you decided. Yes, Lydia stared at him. After I told you not to speak in my name. Yes. After I told you to find where he was and nothing more. Yes. She hated that he would not give her an excuse easy enough to tear apart. You could have ridden back to my house. I could have. It is less than a mile. I know. You could have waited at the gate and asked. Yes. But you did not. Martin drew a breath. No. Lydia's fingers tightened around Samuel's letter. Why? His first answer came too fast. Because he might have left. She said nothing. Martin shut his mouth. When he spoke again, the words were slower. That explains why I was afraid. It doesn't excuse what I did. Lydia felt the sentence land. He continued before she could answer. I saw a chance of being too late again. I took it. I told myself I was preserving a witness. Were you? Partly. And the rest? Martin looked at her. I wanted to make sure the road did not disappear before I could help stop it. There it was. Not noble enough to hide behind. Lydia's anger sharpened. You wanted to stop what happened to your uncle. Yes. Using me. Yes. Do you understand what you did? I used your name when I had no right to. More than that, Samuel now believes you speak for me. Martin lowered his eyes to the letter. Then I correct that. How? He went inside the foreman's office and returned with a clean sheet of paper, ink, and a pen. He placed them on the porch rail. I write him now. Lydia did not soften. In whose name? Mine. Martin bent over the paper. He did not ask her what to say. He wrote, then turned the sheet toward her before folding it. Mr. Price, I contacted you without Mrs. Barlow's authorization. She did not ask me to speak for her or state her position. Any questions about Barlow Place, Thomas Barlow's correspondence, or Mr. Talbot's claim should be answered directly to Mrs. Barlow. My first message was my own action, not hers. Martin Dwyer. Lydia read every word. Change should be answered to where hers to ask. Martin scratched out the phrase and rewrote it. Anything else? No. May I send it? She looked at him. The question mattered more than he could know. Yes. He folded the note, sealed it, and handed it to a ranch rider bound toward Canyon Wells with instructions to put it with the next mail or trusted rider heading toward Walsenburg. Only after the man left did Martin face Lydia again. I'm sorry, I believe you. Hope flashed across his face and died when she continued. That does not mean I am finished being angry. I know, do you? I think so. Lydia stepped down from the porch. Then hear this. I am not your uncle. Frank Talbot is not the man who took his land. And being afraid does not give you permission to decide which risks I take. You're right. Do not agree because you want me calm. I'm agreeing because I was wrong. Lydia wanted to ask whether he could promise never to do it again. She stopped herself. Promises made under pressure were cheap. I need you to leave me alone today. Martin nodded. All right, no question about when she would forgive him. No argument that Samuel's reply justified the act. He simply stepped back. Lydia returned home with the letter in her coat and an ache behind her ribs that had nothing to do with cold. She spent the afternoon reading Thomas's road note again. Frank's permanent road proposal had existed. Samuel remembered the old draft. He would remain near Walsenburg 2 more days. Those facts mattered. Martin's breach mattered too. Lydia refused to make one erase the other. By dusk, she had reached one decision. She would go to Samuel. Whether Martin went with her remained unsettled. Hoofbeats sounded near the gate, just as she banked the stove. Lydia looked through the front window and saw Martin dismount outside the fence. He did not open the gate. Lydia. She stepped onto the porch. "What is it?" "I left my heavier coat on your kitchen peg last night." He stayed where he was. "I can get it another day." She remembered the coat immediately, dark wool beside the door. "Wait." Lydia went inside, took it down, and carried it out. Martin opened the gate only after she nodded. He accepted the coat by its shoulders, keeping his hands away from hers. "Thank you. Samuel will wait 2 days. I know. He remembers an old draft." "Yes." Martin folded the coat over one arm. "You should go." Lydia's chin lifted. "Should?" He caught himself. "You decide whether to go." "Better." A faint grimace crossed his face. Lydia continued. "I am going tomorrow morning." "All right. I will ask Samuel the questions." "Yes. If he has any paper, I decide whether I touch it, copy it, or carry it." "Yes. You do not answer for me." "No. If you think I am making a mistake, you tell me once." Martin nodded. "Once. Then I decide." "Understood." He started to step back through the gate. Lydia watched him. He had done something wrong because fear moved faster than judgment. But when she stopped him, he had not defended the result. He had corrected the representation, accepted her anger, and waited outside her gate afterward. That did not erase the wrong. It gave her something to judge next. Lydia reached out and caught his hand. Martin stopped. She did not lace their fingers together. She held him only long enough to make her meaning clear. "We keep going," she said, "because I choose to. I know. I ask the questions. You ask the questions. And this is not forgiveness for everything. I know that too." His hand remained still inside hers. No pull, no claim. Lydia released him first. "Be here before sunrise." Martin's eyes lifted to hers. "I will." He left through the gate and closed it behind him. Lydia stood outside until his shape disappeared toward Juniper Gate. Tomorrow, Samuel Price might tell her what Thomas had done with Frank's old draft. But tonight, another question mattered just as much. Not whether Martin Dwyer could protect her, whether, after being told no, he could learn to stand beside a woman without stepping in front of her again. Martin was at Lydia's gate before sunrise, exactly as she had ordered. But the ride toward Walsenburg never began. A boy from Canyon Wells reached Barlow Place first, his pony white around the nostrils from cold and hard riding. "Mrs. Barlow?" he called from the road. Lydia stepped off the porch with her coat already buttoned for travel. "Yes." The boy handed her a folded note. "Mr. Talbot says it's urgent." Martin remained outside the gate, reins in one hand, and said nothing. Lydia broke the seal herself. Frank's message was brief. He requested a private meeting at the Mercantile before noon concerning future deliveries and the Barlow Passage. Beneath that, in darker ink, he had written, "I would advise resolving this before involving old employees in matters they may remember poorly." Lydia read the sentence twice. Martin's face hardened when she showed him the paper. He knows about Samuel. Or suspects. Evan, possibly. "You still want to ride west?" Lydia looked toward the pale road leading out of Canyon Wells country. Samuel had promised to wait 2 days. One remained after today. Frank, however, had just revealed that her search had reached him. That was new information, and Lydia refused to pretend it did not matter merely because she had already made a plan. "No," she said. Martin's jaw tightened. "No, we go to Canyon Wells first. Samuel may leave tomorrow. Then we ride before dawn tomorrow." "Lydia," she raised one eyebrow. Martin stopped. A breath passed. Then he nodded. "All right. What do you want me to do?" The correction was small and immediate. Lydia noticed. Ride with me to town. Wait at the livery unless I ask otherwise. Done. Frank Talbot had his office door open when Lydia entered the mercantile. Evan was behind the counter, moving tins from one shelf to another, and trying very hard not to look interested. Frank stood beside his desk with the new right-of-way draft already laid out. Mrs. Barlow. Mr. Talbot, I am glad you came. You mentioned Samuel Price. Frank's mouth tightened. I mentioned old employees. You meant Samuel. I meant men whose memories grow more certain the longer they are away from the facts. Lydia removed her gloves but did not sit. Then show me the facts. Frank tapped the draft. The facts are simple. Thomas allowed my wagons through Barlow Place. The route benefited everyone involved. I am asking you to formalize what was already established. If it was already established, why do you need my signature? His eyes sharpened. Lydia let the question remain between them. Frank leaned back against the desk. Because your husband's death created unnecessary uncertainty. My husband's death created widowhood. You created the uncertainty when you withheld paid wood. And I am prepared to end that unpleasantness. He pushed the paper toward her. Sign this. I send your firewood today. Future winter deliveries continue at ordinary rates. Feed, lamp oil, household freight. No delay, no extra hauling charges. Lydia read the first line and stopped. Permanent passage. Yes, for all Talbot freight. As needed. No, Frank exhaled through his noses. Barlow, pride will cost you. This is not pride. Then what is it? Ownership. The word landed plainly. Frank's expression cooled. You own a narrow strip of ground that happens to shorten a useful commercial route, which is still my ground, until winter forces practicality. Lydia pulled her gloves back on. Is that your business plan? Excuse me. Make the longer road expensive enough that people depend on you. Then call dependence practicality. Frank's face changed by a degree, not enough to be called fear, enough to tell her she had struck closer than he liked. You have been talking to the Harpers. They spoke for themselves. And Dwyer has encouraged this. Martin is, waiting at the livery, because I told him to. Frank's eyes flicked toward the front window. A ranch foreman does not improve your standing by attaching himself to your affairs. Lydia almost smiled. My standing survived marriage, widowhood, drought, 2 bad calving seasons, and your driver taking away wood I paid for. I expect it will survive Martin Dwyer waiting beside a hitch rail. Frank's patience finally cracked. Then understand this plainly. Talbot wagons will not make further deliveries to Barlow Place. Not wood, not feed, not household freight. If you want goods from Walsenburg, arrange them yourself. I will. Independent haulers charge more, then I will pay more where necessary. For how long? Lydia picked up the unsigned draft, folded it once, and placed it back on his desk. Long enough for you to learn that cold does not make my signature yours. She turned away. Mrs. Barlow. Lydia stopped at the office door. You are turning a private disagreement into a public embarrassment. No, I am declining your road. Outside, Martin was exactly where she had left him. He had bought nothing, asked no questions, spoken to no clerk. Lydia crossed the street toward him. He cut me off. Martin's gaze sharpened. Everything. Talbot deliveries to Barlow Place. Then we use juniper wagons. The answer came fast. Too fast. No, Martin stopped. Lydia continued. Juniper does not become my merchant because Frank is angry. I meant we can haul what you need until you decide the danger has passed. Martin closed his mouth. His shoulders eased a fraction. I'm doing it again. Yes. He glanced down the street, then back to her. All right, what do you want to do? Lydia had already begun forming the answer inside Frank's office. I want to know whether Talbot's advantage exists because everyone keeps buying separately. Martin waited. Go on. The Harpers need feed. The Millers buy lamp oil and flour through Frank. Juniper brings larger freight from Canyon Wells, but could buy in Walsenburg if the load justified the distance. You want to combine orders. 1 wagon, 1 independent teamster. Each household pays its share of the haul. Martin's expression changed from concern to concentration. Longer road. Yes, more time. Yes, but less cost if the wagon is full. That is the question. Martin nodded slowly. Ransom will listen. I will ask him. Right. By mid-afternoon, Lydia stood in Juniper Gates Stores building with Mr. Ransom, Martin, and 4 sheets of paper spread on a crate. No mysterious accounting, just lists. Barlow Place needed firewood, lamp oil, and flour. Harper's needed feed. Miller's needed flour and kerosene. Juniper Gate needed salt, harness leather, and a larger feed order before the next cold spell. Ransom rubbed his chin. 1 wagon from Walsenburg could carry most of this. If the teamster will take a mixed load, Lydia said, and if each buyer pays a fair share based on weight and space. You organizing it? Yes, then I'll put Juniper's order in. Lydia looked at him. Even though your ranch would save money if I opened the cut-through. Ransom shrugged. I'd also save money if you gave me your south pasture. Don't mean I get it. Martin looked away, hiding a smile. Ransom continued, find a teamster. I'll pay Juniper's proper share. Nothing more. Lydia folded the list together. The plan was imperfect. It depended on weather, wagon capacity, and a driver willing to take a longer haul. But it was hers. Frank had tried to make the world narrow until only his road remained. Lydia had answered by widening the choices. When Ransom left, Martin stayed near the doorway. You did that fast. I have been keeping a house through winter longer than Frank has been trying to frighten me. Fair point. Samuel tomorrow, before sunrise. You still want to come? Martin's answer came without hesitation. Yes, Lydia studied him. Even if you say nothing unless I ask. Especially then. The words caught her off guard. She stepped closer. Martin remained still. Days earlier, his fear had pushed him past her instructions. Today that same fear had appeared, and he had stopped when she told him to. Not perfect, different. Lydia put her arms around him. Martin went rigid with surprise. His hands lifted, then halted at his sides. Lydia tightened her arms once, unmistakably. Only then did he hold her. His embrace was warm through the wool of their coats, firm without trapping her. Lydia rested her cheek against his chest and listened to the steady beat beneath it. No kiss. Not yet. Martin's hand settled between her shoulder blades. Tell me where you want me, he said. Lydia closed her eyes. Beside me. His arms tightened by the smallest degree. All right. When they separated, neither tried to turn the moment into a promise larger than it was. Lydia gathered the freight lists and tucked them into her coat. Tomorrow Samuel Price might finally answer what Thomas had done with Frank's old draft. But tonight, Frank Talbot had already learned one thing he had not expected. Taking away Lydia's choices did not make her surrender. It made her build new ones. Samuel Price was smaller than Lydia, expected, and older than Martin had guessed. With a white mustache, a narrow face, and ink-darkened fingertips that made him look as though he had never fully stopped being a clerk. He answered his daughter's door west of Walsenburg just after 2 in the afternoon, glanced once at Martin, then focused on Lydia. Mrs. Barlow, yes, you came yourself. I said I would. His eyes moved briefly toward Martin. And he came with you, because I asked him to. Martin removed his hat. Mr. Price. Samuel gave him a dry look. You caused me some confusion. I know. Your second note helped. I'm glad. Lydia appreciated that Martin left it there. No explanation. No effort to earn absolution from a stranger. Samuel stepped aside. Come in. His daughter's house was modest and warm, with a coal stove in the front room and a faded rug beneath the table. Samuel's daughter poured coffee, then withdrew to the kitchen without being asked. Martin took the chair farthest from the table. Lydia sat opposite Samuel and placed no papers in front of him. Before I show you anything, she said, I want to know what you remember. Samuel nodded slowly. Good way to ask. Do you remember Thomas Barlow? Yes. Do you remember Frank Talbot proposing a permanent wagon road across Barlow Place? Yes. Lydia kept both hands in her lap. What do you remember about it? Samuel leaned back. The spring road washed out east of Canyon Wells. Talbot asked Mr. Barlow for temporary passage. Barlow allowed it. Wagons crossed for several weeks. That much I know. Later that year, Talbot decided the route saved enough time that he wanted it made regular. Martin did not move. Lydia asked, Did Thomas agree? Not to the draft I handled. Her pulse quickened. There was a draft. Yes, signed. Not when it came back. Lydia felt the answer settle through her, heavy and strange. Relief should have been simple. It was not. Came back from Thomas. Yes. Did you see it yourself? I did. What happened to it? Samuel's mouth tightened. Frank told me to clear old correspondence when I left. Anything unresolved, outdated, duplicated. Most clerks throw that sort of thing away. You did not. I dislike destroying paper that proves people once disagreed. He stood. Wait here. Samuel disappeared through a narrow hallway. Lydia could hear a cupboard door open, then the scrape of a wooden box. Martin's gaze met hers only briefly. He did not speak. Samuel returned carrying a flat packet tied with faded string. He placed it on the table but did not open it yet. This is mine now, he said, not Talbot's. I kept old correspondence I believed had not been properly settled before I left. Do you have many of his papers? Lydia asked. No. A few letters, 2 drafts, 1 freight dispute. Nothing like an office archive. And Thomas's? Samuel untied the string. 1. He pulled out a folded sheet. The paper had yellowed at the creases. Frank Talbot's hand filled most of the front, outlining regular wagon passage along the northern portion of Barlow Place, for freight serving, Juniper Gate, and other customers beyond. Lydia recognized the shape of the current agreement immediately. The wording was older. The purpose was not. At the bottom, where Thomas's signature should have been, there was nothing. Lydia stared at the blank line. Turn it over, Samuel said. She did. A note ran along the margin in Thomas's handwriting. Spring Passage was temporary dew-washed road. No permanent road agreed. Any continued use must be discussed with Lydia before acceptance. Lydia read it once, then again. The room grew too warm. Martin remained still. Samuel watched her, not the paper. Lydia traced Thomas's words with her eyes, not her fingers. He had remembered her. He had written her name into the decision. Yet he had still kept the matter from her while he was alive. Both truths existed together. That was harder than anger. Did Frank see this note? She asked. Yes. Did he argue? For weeks. Did Thomas ever send another signed copy? Not through me. Could he have done so after you left? Samuel gave a small shrug. Anything is possible. I can only tell you what crossed my desk. Lydia nodded. The limit mattered. Did Frank ever tell you Thomas had finally agreed? He said they had an understanding. Those words. Lydia looked at the unsigned signature line again. So this does not prove. Frank has no other paper. No, it proves this draft was not accepted. Yes, and that Thomas called the earlier passage temporary. Yes, Lydia let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Thank you. Samuel folded the document, but did not put it away. You need this more than I do for the next few days. Lydia looked up. You are willing to let me take it? Temporarily. I will keep it in my possession. That is what I intend. And if Frank asks, tell him Samuel Price finally found a use for keeping old paper. Lydia almost smiled. Samuel slid the folded draft across the table. She placed it herself inside her leather satchel and fastened both buckles. Martin did not offer to carry it. He did not even look at the satchel after that. They left Samuel's daughter's house before dusk, but did not attempt the full ride home. The road back toward Walsenburg was already dim beneath a hardening sky, and Lydia refused to turn one solved question into a foolish night journey. They took separate rooms at a boarding house near the livery. Martin ate supper downstairs with 2 freight men. Lydia carried her satchel upstairs and kept it beside the bed. Before sunrise the next morning, they were riding east again. By mid-morning, they had reached the outskirts of Canyon Wells. News had traveled faster than they had. Near the livery, a man leaning against a freight wagon called out, Dwyer, you hauling widows and lawsuits now? 2 others laughed. Lydia slowed her mare. Martin's jaw set. Keep riding, he said. She turned her head. What? He caught himself immediately. No, sorry. The man called again. Careful, Mrs. Barlow. Folks might think the foreman runs your place now. Martin dismounted. Lydia did too. She expected anger from him. Instead, he faced the man and said only, Mrs. Barlow speaks for herself. Then he stepped aside. Lydia walked across the road. You seem worried about my place, she said. The man's grin weakened. Only making a joke. Then make a better one. One of his companions coughed into his fist to hide a laugh. Lydia continued. Frank Talbot asked me to grant permanent wagon passage across my land. I declined. If that troubles you, I suggest you offer him yours. The man straightened. Wasn't my business. Now you understand. She turned away. Martin did not smile when she reached him. That would have made the moment his. He simply picked up her mare's reins and held them loose until she took them back. They rode out of Canyon Wells in silence. The satchel rested against Lydia's hip, the old draft secure inside. Several miles beyond town, Martin finally spoke. If my being there makes things worse for you, I can stay away when you deal with Talbot. Lydia reined in. Martin stopped beside her. Do you want to stay away? She asked. No. Then why offer? Because I don't want people using me to make your choices look like mine. Lydia studied him. Martin, if you disappear every time someone questions my judgment, you are still letting them decide where you stand. He absorbed that. Fair. I asked you beside me. I did not ask you to vanish when it became inconvenient. All right. He started to turn his horse forward. Lydia reached across the narrow space between them and caught the lapel of his coat. Martin froze. Her heart beat harder than the ride justified. She had thought about this since the kitchen table, since the handhold, since the embrace, since learning how quickly trust could be damaged and how slowly it had to be rebuilt. Martin's eyes dropped to her hand, then lifted to her face. Lydia. She did not let go. His voice lowered. Are you sure? Yes. She leaned toward him and kissed him. Briefly, deliberately. Martin did not move for the first breath. Then he kissed her back with the same restraint he had shown at her gate, at her table, and after every no she had given him since his mistake. No claim, no rush. Lydia ended it first. Martin let her. Their horses shifted beneath them, impatient with human complications. Lydia kept hold of his coat for another second. That was not gratitude. I know, and it does not make you responsible for me. I know that too. His voice had roughened. Good. Lydia released him and touched the satchel at her side. Thomas had not signed away the road. Samuel's paper proved that much. Frank could still lie, pressure, bargain, or produce some other claim. But now Lydia knew the question had changed. She was no longer trying to discover whether her late husband had given Frank Talbot a permanent right through Barlow Place. She was waiting to see what Frank would do when faced with proof that he had needed her consent all along. By the time the independent freight wagon rolled out of Walsenburg before sunrise. 2 days later, Lydia had checked every sack, crate, keg, and bundle twice. She and Martin had ridden in the previous afternoon and taken separate rooms at the same boarding house near the livery. Because the teamster wanted the load assembled before daylight, and Lydia had no intention of gambling several households. Winter supplies on, hurried counting in the dark. Now frost silvered the freight yard, lantern light swung from hooks beneath the loading shed, and a 6-mule team stamped steam into the cold. Lydia stood beside the wagon with 4 order sheets folded in one hand. "Juniper first," she said. "Salt, harness leather, 6 feed sacks." The teamster, a narrow-faced man named Eli Mercer, pointed with his pencil as his hired boy checked the load. Middle row, tied under canvas. Harper feed, rear left. Miller flour and kerosene, front crate and 2 cans. Barlow. Eli glanced toward the stacked wood lashed along the wagon sides. "Your pine makes up most of what is trying to break my axle. It was paid for by someone willing to deliver it." The teamster grinned. "That would be me." Lydia checked the lashings herself. Firewood, flour, lamp oil. Nothing luxurious, nothing dramatic. Ordinary things a household needed badly enough that Frank Talbot had believed he could turn them into leverage. Martin came from the livery, carrying 2 filled canteens and a wrapped packet of bread and cold meat. He placed Lydia's canteen on the wagon seat beside her without comment. "Team sound?" she asked. "Mercer says yes. I asked you." Martin glanced at the mules. "Sound. 2 are older than I'd choose for fast freight, but we're not racing." "Good." Eli climbed onto the wagon seat. "If we take the east road all the way, we lose time near the low stretch." Lydia nodded. "We take the established road, even though your cut-through would save us." He said it without accusation. Lydia met his eyes. "There is no cut-through for this wagon." Eli shrugged. "Your land?" "Yes." He flicked the reins, and the team leaned into the traces. Martin rode beside the wagon on his gelding. Lydia rode on the other side, her leather satchel strapped across her shoulder beneath her coat. Thomas's old unsigned draft rested inside. She had brought it because Frank's claim might meet them before the freight did. Martin had not offered to carry it. That mattered more than she wanted it to. The road out of Walsenburg was hard and pale beneath the early light. As the sun rose, the loaded wagon settled into the slower rhythm of real freight. Frank had not lied about everything. The longer road cost time. It cost animal strength. It cost money. By mid-morning, Eli had already stopped twice to check traces and once to water the team. Lydia watched the miles accumulate and understood why Talbot wanted her meadow. One shortcut across Barlow Place did not merely save convenience. Repeated through a season, it saved hours enough to make his prices harder for others to match. That was why the route mattered. Not tradition, advantage. "You're doing arithmetic in your head," Martin said when they stopped near a shallow creek. Lydia dismounted. "I am estimating how many loads Frank could move in a month if he saved even an hour each time." Enough to care, enough to withhold paid firewood from a widow. Martin's mouth tightened. You still calling yourself a widow when you're angry at him? Lydia turned. What else would I call myself? Lydia Barlow. She held his gaze. That sounded dangerously thoughtful. I can take it back. No. She lifted the canteen. Leave it. They ate standing beside the wagon while the mules rested. Eli complained about the extra distance, but not enough to suggest turning back. Lydia had arranged the cost. So Juniper Gate carried the largest share because it took the greatest weight, while the smaller households paid according to space and load. She had shown the figures to each buyer before they agreed. No favors hidden inside generosity. No one owing Martin, no one owing her. That was the point. By early afternoon, the road narrowed along a rough rise, where recent wagon traffic had cut deep ruts between stones. Eli stood on the brake while the mules strained. The rear wheels dropped into a hollow and stopped hard enough to jolt the stacked crates. Hold, he shouted. The team went still. Martin was off his horse first, rear axles clear. Eli climbed down and swore at the rut. Too much weight on the back quarter. We can force it and risk a wheel or lighten her. Martin looked toward Lydia. Your call? Eli raised. She driving now? Lydia stepped to the rear of the wagon. No, but 3 households and Juniper Gate trusted me with the load. She studied what could come off without damaging anything. 2 Harper feed sacks, 1 Juniper salt sack. The Miller flour stays dry under canvas. My wood stays lashed. We carry the sacks past the rut, get the wagon through, reload on level ground. Eli considered. That'll do. Martin reached for the nearest feed sack, then paused. Lydia nodded once. Take it. He shouldered it. The hired boy took the second. Lydia and Eli carried the salt between them. No one turned the delay into heroics. They moved the goods, eased the wagon out, then loaded everything back under her count. 1, 2, 3. Nothing lost, nothing silently shifted. When the last rope was reatied, Lydia ran her hand over the knot. Good. Martin held out his canteen. Drink. She took it. That sounded like an order. Request badly dressed. Improve your tailoring. Working on it. His mouth curved. Lydia drank and handed the canteen back. Their fingers met around the leather strap. Martin did not pull away at once. Instead, he turned his hand palm up, offering rather than taking. Lydia placed her hand in his, 1 squeeze. Brief, warm, enough to carry the memory of their kiss, without pretending the road had disappeared around them. She released him first. We still have miles. I noticed. By late afternoon, the light had begun to flatten when the country near Canyon Wells opened ahead. Eli was watching the road. Martin was watching the wagon team. Lydia was the one who saw dust moving north beyond a low rise. There, Martin turned. A Talbot freight wagon was crossing toward the Barlow side of the country. Lighter than theirs, and moving faster. Lydia could not yet see Frank himself, only the team, wagon canvas, and the angle of travel. Martin's body tightened in the saddle. That road leads toward your north meadow. Yes, Eli squinted. Could be headed Juniper. Not by the established road, Lydia said. Martin looked at her. He may be trying to use it before we get there. Lydia understood the strategy immediately. Not law, habit. A wagon crosses today. Another tomorrow. As men begin saying the route is already in use, temporary becomes customary because nobody stops long enough to ask who opened the gate. Martin shifted his reins. I can ride ahead. Lydia's answer came at once. No, he waited, no argument. What do you want? We stay with the wagon. Lydia, if I leave the freight I organized to race Frank home, then he still decides what matters. Martin exhaled. All right. When we reach Barlow Place, My gate opens for the wagon I invited. And Talbot? Lydia looked toward the distant plume of dust. Frank can stop outside and ask. Eli glanced between them. You expect trouble. I expect a merchant who has mistaken persistence for permission. The team rolled on. The longer road had cost them hours. Lydia could feel every one of them in her back and shoulders. But behind her sat firewood Frank had tried to keep. Feed he had tried to make difficult, and proof that his business was not the only road between Walsenburg and home. Ahead, Talbot's wagon was moving faster. That no longer frightened her. Speed had already cost Martin his judgment once. Lydia had learned something from that too. The first person to reach a gate was not the person who owned the right to open it. Frank Talbot's wagon reached Lydia's north gate first, but the gate was still closed when her freight wagon came into view. That was the first thing she saw from the rise. The second was Frank himself, standing beside his team with one hand braced on the wagon seat, his coat buttoned high against the cold. 2 hired men waited behind him. On the juniper side of the fence, Mr. Ransom stood with 2 ranch hands near the receiving yard, watching without touching Lydia's latch. Martin rode beside her in silence. He did not ask whether she wanted him to go ahead. He did not tell her what Frank was trying to do. He simply stayed where she had asked him to stay. Eli Mercer slowed the mule team. Looks crowded. Keep coming, Lydia said. Frank heard the wagon before he saw her. He turned and his face changed when he recognized the load behind her. Firewood lashed high, feed sacks, flour, lamp oil, salt and harness leather for Juniper Gate. One long, expensive answer rolling toward him on iron-rimmed wheels. Lydia rode past the independent wagon and stopped 10 yards from her gate. Frank stepped forward. Mrs. Barlow. Mr. Talbot, I was beginning to wonder whether you intended to come home. I did. His eyes moved toward Eli's team. Walsenburg. Yes, costly trip, more than your road through my meadow. For now. Lydia dismounted. Martin did the same several paces behind her. Frank noticed. You have made this larger than it needed to be. You brought a freight wagon to my closed gate. For Juniper Gate. Then use the road Juniper Gate has always received freight by. Frank glanced toward Ransom across the fence. That road wastes half a day. Then your problem is time. My problem is unnecessary obstruction. Lydia felt Martin move behind her, then stop. She was grateful for the stop. Frank continued, his voice pitched to carry toward the ranch hands. Thomas Barlow allowed this passage. Everyone here knows it. Ransom said nothing. Lydia did. Thomas allowed temporary passage during a washed-out spring road. That is your recollection. It is also his. Frank's gaze sharpened. Lydia took the leather satchel from her shoulder. She did not open it yet. Do you have a signed permanent agreement? I have years of use and an understanding with your husband. Years? Lydia asked. Your wagons used the meadow for a few weeks, and afterward when conditions required. Not while Thomas was alive that I saw, not after his death with my permission. Frank's hired driver shifted uncomfortably near the team. Frank ignored him. Mrs. Barlow, a commercial route does not become imaginary because one person decides she dislikes it. Lydia took one step nearer. And a favor does not become permanent because a merchant finds it profitable. Frank's jaw hardened. You have no idea what this freight costs. I do now. She gestured toward Eli Mercer's wagon. I rode the long road. I loaded the goods. I paid my share. Once is enough to prove another road exists. Frank gave a short laugh without humor. You think one shared wagon will replace regular supply? No, then this proves nothing. It proves I do not have to sign your paper because winter frightens me. That landed. Frank's eyes went cold. You may change your mind after the second trip, or the third, perhaps. Lydia's voice stayed level. If I do, I will open the gate because I choose to, not because you arrived before I did. Frank looked toward Martin. And Dwyer, he chooses too. Martin's face remained still. No, one word. Frank waited. Martin added, Mrs. Barlow speaks for Barlow Place. Frank's attention shifted to Ransom. Then perhaps the ranch owner can be practical. Juniper Gate saves money if this road opens. Ransom walked closer to the fence, but stayed on his side. True. Frank's mouth eased slightly. Then tell her. Tell her what? That her refusal costs your operation money. She knows, and you accept that. Ransom shrugged. Her meadow. Frank stared at him. You are willing to pay extra freight because a widow wants to make a point. Lydia's shoulders tightened. Ransom's expression did not. I'm willing to pay my own freight rather than make somebody else's land solve my problem. Frank's composure slipped. You expect Mercer to haul all winter? Maybe somebody else. Maybe Talbot Mercantile, if Talbot learns the regular road still exists. One of the juniper hands coughed into his fist to hide a smile. Ransom did not. I buy supplies. I don't buy Mrs. Barlow's permission. Frank turned back to Lydia. You have filled their heads with a story. No. Lydia unfastened the satchel. I found the paper you hoped nobody kept. Martin did not move closer. Neither did Ransom. Lydia drew out the old folded draft Samuel Price had entrusted to her and held it in both hands. Frank recognized it before she opened it. His face lost color, barely. Enough. Where did you get that? Samuel Price. Frank's mouth tightened. Price stole business correspondence. Then you recognize it. I recognize old paper. Do you recognize Thomas's handwriting? Lydia unfolded the draft. She did not hand it to Frank. She held it where she could read the margin herself. Spring Passage was temporary dew-washed road. No permanent road agreed. Any continued use must be discussed with Lydia before acceptance. The wind moved across the meadow. No one spoke. Frank recovered first. That was one draft. Yes, it does not prove there was no later agreement. No. Lydia met his eyes. Show me the later agreement. Frank's silence answered before his words did. Thomas and I spoke after that. Then show me what he signed. Not every arrangement is written, but this one was important enough for you to draft twice. Frank's jaw set. You have a current proposal because your husband's death created uncertainty. Lydia folded the paper along its old creases. My husband's note says the uncertainty was mine to resolve. Frank's driver looked away. One of his hired men shifted his boots in the frozen grass. Lydia placed the document back inside her satchel and fastened it. You may use the established road to Juniper Gate, she said. You may ask me again someday about passage through Barlow Place. I may still say no. But you will not cross today. Frank's voice dropped. You think this ends because you found one old note? No, good. It ends today because the gate is mine. Behind them came the creak of Eli Mercer's wagon descending the rise. The 6 mules leaned into the traces, tired but steady. Firewood and supplies filled the wagon from front board to tail. Frank turned toward the sound. Lydia watched the calculation move through his face. His leverage had depended on inconvenience becoming desperation. The longer road had just arrived carrying proof that desperation was not guaranteed. Eli drew the wagon to a stop behind Lydia. Where do you want it? He called. Lydia turned. Barlow Wood unloads at my yard first. Then Harper and Miller Goods continue by the south track. Juniper takes its freight through the ranch entrance. Not through here? Eli nodded toward the closed north gate. Not through here. Good enough. Ransom stepped toward his own ranch entrance. Dwyer, once Mrs. Barlow's wood is off, bring Mercer around. We'll unload salt and leather before dark. Martin nodded. Yes, sir. Frank stared at Ransom. You are accepting freight from an independent hauler while we have standing business. We had a favored arrangement, Ransom said. Had? I'll review winter suppliers after this load. Over a disagreement that is not yours. Over short wood, irregular deliveries, and a route assumption I never approved. Lydia felt a small jolt of surprise. Ransom had not forgotten her earlier inspections. Good, Frank said. Those were ordinary discrepancies. Then, ordinary competition shouldn't trouble you. Frank's expression hardened. He looked at Lydia once more. You will regret paying for that road. Maybe. Lydia's answer was calm. But if I regret it, the regret will still be mine. Frank climbed onto his wagon. He did not threaten her again. He did not suddenly confess. He merely took the reins from his driver and turned the team toward the established road. That was enough. Lydia watched until the wagon moved away from her fence. Then she opened her gate for Eli Mercer. Her gate, her hand on the latch, her choice. The independent freight wagon rolled through toward Barlow Yard, carrying the wood Frank had thought she could not obtain without him. By dusk, the last of Lydia's firewood was stacked under cover, and Juniper's goods had been hauled around by the proper entrance. The Harpers and Millers had taken their shares. Eli had been paid. Nothing about the day had been cheap or easy. That was why the victory felt real. Martin found Lydia beside the woodshed after the others had gone. The blue-handled maul leaned against the wall near the new stack. He stopped a few feet from her. You were right. Lydia glanced over. About what? More than one thing. Dangerous answer. About Frank, about the road, about me. She waited. Martin rubbed one hand over the back of his neck. I need to say this, while winning can't make it sound prettier. Lydia's attention sharpened. Say it. I was wrong to write Samuel in your name. If we had found nothing today, I'd still have been wrong. Yes, and if Frank had produced another paper, I'd still have been wrong. Yes. Martin nodded. I know. Lydia studied him. Why say it again? Because I don't want you thinking I apologized only because the choice worked out. The answer loosened this last knot she had been carrying since Samuel's letter. I trusted you again before today, she said. Martin's gaze lifted. Why? Because after I told you no, you changed what you did. He did not answer. Lydia stepped closer. Today you could have ridden ahead. You told me not to. You could have blocked the gate. Wasn't mine to block. You could have spoken over me when Frank pushed. Wasn't mine to answer. Lydia put both arms around him. Martin's breath caught. This time he did not freeze from surprise for long. His arms came around her, warm and strong, holding without closing her in. Lydia rested against him and felt the day finally leave her shoulders. That, she said against his coat, is why. Martin's hand moved slowly between her shoulder blades. Lydia. She drew back enough to see him. He waited. She lifted one hand to his face and kissed him. Not the brief first kiss on the road outside Canyon Wells. This one carried relief. Anger survived, trust restored, and the sharp knowledge that she wanted him when there was no longer any crisis requiring him to stay. Martin kissed her back, deeper but still restrained, taking only what she gave. When Lydia moved closer, his hand settled at her waist. When she eased away, he let her. Their foreheads rested together for a breath. Martin's voice was rough when he spoke. What happens now? Lydia looked past him toward the full wood stack, the closed gate beyond it, and the road Frank had been forced to take. Now, she said, We find out whether you still come by when I don't need rescuing." Martin smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask." 3 days after Frank Talbot turned his wagon away from her gate, Martin came to Barlow Place, with no axe, no freight list, and no practical excuse at all. Lydia noticed that before she noticed anything else. The afternoon was cold but bright, the north meadow dry beneath a thin crust of frost, and the independent Walsenburg shipment had already changed the shape of her winter. Firewood stood stacked deep beneath the shed roof. The lamp oil was stored. Flour bins were no longer near empty. The Harpers had paid their share of the haul. Mr. Ransom had settled Juniper Gate's portion without argument. Nothing required Martin Dwyer to cross the pasture that day. He stopped outside the gate anyway. Lydia opened it. "You are empty-handed." Martin glanced down at himself. "I brought a hat, a generous contribution. I could go back for the axe, do not." He came through after she stepped aside. That habit had survived every change between them. Lydia hoped it always would. "Coffee?" she asked. "If you're having some." That was nearly a proper answer. "I've been practicing." Inside, Martin removed his coat and hung it beside the door. Lydia set 2 cups on the table. Samuel Price's old right-of-way draft lay nearby, wrapped in clean paper and tied for return. Martin glanced toward it, but did not touch it. Sending it back? "Tomorrow. Ransom has a rider going toward Walsenburg. Samuel trusted me with the original. Frank has seen what it says. I do not need to keep another man's paper longer than necessary." "Makes sense." Lydia poured the coffee. "Mr. Ransom offered me regular work." Martin looked up. "How regular?" 2 mornings a week through winter. Checking deliveries, stores, and freight arrangements. More if spring ordering becomes complicated. "You taking it?" "Yes." His answer came with a simple nod. "Good." Lydia sat across from him. "That is all you have to say. You want a speech?" "No." "Then good seems safe." "Coward. Experienced." A smile threatened at the corner of her mouth. She let it come. The room felt different, without a crisis spread across the table. No withheld receipt. No road draft Frank wanted signed. No freight lists waiting to be solved. Only coffee, fading winter light, and the man she had kissed beside the woodshed, after he finally learned that being useful did not give him the right to lead every fight. That should have made conversation easier. It did not. Martin set down his cup. "You said the other day we'd find out whether I still came by when you didn't need rescuing." "I remember. I'm here." Lydia looked at him. "I noticed. I don't know whether that answers the question." "Partly. What is the rest?" She folded her hands around the warm cup. "Whether you know what you want when there is no Frank Talbot to stand against." Martin's face lost its teasing. "I do." Lydia waited. He did not rush. "I want my work at Juniper Gate. I'm good at it. Ransom pays fair, and I'm not looking to become a ranch owner just because stories sound better that way." Lydia's mouth curved. "Good. I want you to keep Barlow Place if that is what you want." "It is. I want you to take the work Ransom offered." "I already told you I am." "Then I'm glad twice." Dangerous extravagance. Martin ignored that. "And I want to come here when there's no fence to mend, no wagon to unload, and no man threatening your winter." Lydia's pulse changed. "For what?" His eyes held hers. "For you." The answer was plain enough to frighten her more than a grand declaration might have. Lydia looked toward the window. Thomas had once sat at this table with muddy boots beneath his chair and a pencil behind one ear, telling her not to trouble herself over some bill or agreement he intended to handle. She had loved him. That truth had not weakened. Neither had the anger she had earned the right to feel after his death. Martin did not replace that history. He occupied a different place because he had learned to leave room for her inside it. "There are conditions," she said. Martin leaned back slightly. "I expected there might be. Barlow Place remains mine. Yes. My wages remain mine, yes. If Juniper Gate benefits from something involving my land, you tell me. You do not decide whether I should hear it. Yes. If you think I am wrong, you may say so. Generous. Once." Martin almost smiled. "Cruel. And if you ever use my name again without asking me, I know." Lydia lifted an eyebrow. "Do you? You'll make me write another correction and probably send it farther. At minimum." His expression sobered. "I won't do it again." This time Lydia believed him because the promise came after weeks of proof, not before it. Martin rested his hands on the table. "My turn? You have conditions?" "One. Only one. I'm less organized." "Clearly. If you need help, I want you to ask when you want it instead of refusing, because you're afraid accepting means owing me." Lydia went still. Martin did not soften the words. "I don't mean you have to ask me first, or at all, but I'd rather hear no because you don't want help than because some other man taught you every kindness keeps an account." Lydia lowered her gaze to the coffee. "That may take practice. I've had some. You have. So can you." She looked at him again. "You are becoming bold. You kissed me twice. Once first, once later. I counted both. That was your mistake." Martin smiled and warmth moved through Lydia before she could stop it. She stood. "Come outside." "Why?" "Because I said so." "Ah, romance." The woodshed cast a long shadow across the yard. Lydia stepped inside and reached for the blue-handled maul. The repaired head remained firm. Thomas's chipped paint still showed through every worn place on the handle. Martin stood at the doorway, giving her room. Lydia ran her thumb over the blue paint. "I said something to you the second morning you came here." Martin's expression changed. "I remember." She believed him. "If only I'd met you sooner." He did not smile this time. "You meant before you learned to mistrust kindness." "That was what I said." Lydia looked down at the maul. "I meant it then. And now?" She set the maul against the wall. "Now I mean something different." Martin waited. Lydia turned toward him. "I wish I had learned sooner that a man could listen when listening was harder than acting." His throat moved. Lydia continued before courage became embarrassment. "Thomas loved me. I loved him. I will not make him smaller so that you can become larger. I don't want you to. I know. That was the point. Loving you does not erase him." Martin went very still. Lydia stepped closer. "And I do love you." No wind gust, no horse cried out, no dramatic interruption came to rescue either of them from the truth. Martin's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, emotion had stripped some of the reserve from his face. "Lydia, do not ask whether I am sure unless you truly think I do not know my own mind." A rough laugh escaped him. "I was going to say I love you too. Better. Much." He reached for her hand but stopped before touching it. Lydia placed hers in his. His fingers closed around hers. "I love you," he said, "not because you needed wood. Not because Frank gave me somebody to dislike. Because you see what is in front of you and you refuse to pretend it is something else." Lydia's eyes burned, but she did not look away. Martin lifted their joined hands slightly. "And because you make me answer the question I'd rather avoid." "Which question?" "Whether helping somebody is still help if they did not ask. You needed a widow for that. Apparently a difficult one." Martin, competent, strong-minded, occasionally terrifying, improving. He smiled, then sobered again. "There is another question," Lydia knew before he asked. Still, she waited. Martin did not kneel. He did not produce a ring he could not afford or make promises about land he did not own. He simply stood before her in the woodshed where their story had first become practical. "Lydia Barlow, will you marry me in the spring?" She let herself feel the weight of yes before giving it. Not escape, not rescue, not repayment. Choice. Yes. Martin exhaled as if he had been holding his breath for a week. Lydia added, "I am not moving out of this house." "I figured. And you are not quitting Juniper Gate because you think marriage requires a dramatic sacrifice." "I wasn't planning to." "Good. Anything else before I'm permitted to be happy?" Lydia stepped closer and put one hand against his cheek. "No." She kissed him first. Martin's free arm came around her only after she leaned into him, and the kiss deepened without hurry. Warmth, relief, desire without demand. When Lydia drew back, he let her. Their foreheads rested together. "Tomorrow," Martin murmured, "you're sending Samuelswell's paper back." "Yes. And after that?" Lydia glanced toward the full winter stack. "After that, we finish what remains in the yard before another hard freeze. Together," she smiled, "together." By the last week of December, the woodshed at Barlow Place was full enough that Lydia no longer counted every armful before lighting the stove. She noticed the freedom of that only after several cold mornings had passed without calculation. No standing in the doorway measuring one night against the next. No wondering whether a merchant's wagon would appear before the weather turned harder. The wood was there. So were flour, lamp oil, and feed enough to carry the place comfortably into the new year. The shared freight arrangement had not become a grand business. Lydia preferred that. When several households had enough need to fill a wagon, they combined orders. When they did not, each found another way. Eli Mercer hauled twice more from Walsenburg before Christmas, and both trips cost more than Talbot's shortcut would have. Everyone knew it. They paid anyway, because the terms were plain before the wagon left. Frank Talbot still opened his mercantile every morning in Canyon Wells. His sign had not come down. No sheriff had hauled him away. No crowd had ruined him with one dramatic accusation. Something less theatrical had happened. Customers began asking questions. Mr. Ransom no longer treated Talbot as Juniper Gate's automatic first choice for winter supplies. Henry Harper compared hauling costs before buying feed. The millers ordered lamp oil through Mercer once because the combined load made sense. Frank had lost the easiest advantage a merchant could possess, the belief that people had nowhere else to go. He had also stopped sending wagons toward Lydia's north gate. That was enough. Samuel Price's old draft had gone back west within days of the confrontation. Lydia wrapped it in the same clean paper she had used at her kitchen table, tied it securely, and gave it to a juniper rider traveling through Walsenburg with instructions to place it directly in Samuel's hands. 2 weeks later, a short note came back confirming its return. Lydia kept that letter, not as proof against Frank, as proof that an object entrusted to her had gone home where it belonged. On a bright December morning, Lydia sat in the juniper stores, building with a delivery sheet in one hand and a feed sack open before her. Mr. Ransom had hired her for 2 mornings each week, as promised. Sometimes the work took less than 2 hours. Sometimes a freight load arrived late enough to keep her until noon. Martin never hovered. That morning, he was somewhere beyond the East Pens with a crew moving cattle away from a frozen water trough. Lydia had just finished checking a harness leather shipment when Mrs. Harper appeared in the doorway. "Am I interrupting?" "Only if you have come to steal 6 pounds of salt." Mrs. Harper smiled. "Henry would complain about carrying it home." She held out a folded paper. Mercer gave us 2 prices for January feed. One if we join a juniper load, another if we send alone. Would you look at them? Lydia took the sheet. You want me to tell you which to choose? No, I want you to tell me whether the difference makes sense. Lydia felt a small warmth at that, not because someone needed her, because Mrs. Harper had come to her directly. Sit down. They worked through the distances, load shares, and number of sacks. One price was higher because the Harpers would take nearly half a wagon alone. The other became cheaper if Juniper filled the remaining space. Nothing suspicious, nothing dramatic. The numbers make sense, Lydia said. Then we wait for the combined load. Mrs. Harper folded the paper. I thought so. You did not need me. No, she tucked the sheet into her coat. But I wanted to be sure. Lydia smiled. That is allowed. When Mrs. Harper left, Martin appeared at the far end of the ranch yard, carrying his plain axe across one shoulder. He had seen her through the open store's door. Instead of coming inside, he stopped outside and waited until she closed the ledger. Finished? He asked. For today. Ransom says I can have the afternoon. A rare mercy. I suspect he wants me away from the cattle. That would explain his good judgment. Martin put one hand over his heart. You're crueler since the engagement. You are only noticing now. They rode back to Barlow Place together. Martin still slept in the Foreman cottage at Juniper Gate. That arrangement had not become awkward simply because spring marriage was planned. If anything, Lydia found comfort in the lack of urgency. Neither needed to prove commitment by rushing what they had already chosen. At her gate, Martin dismounted first. He did not open it. Lydia swung down, lifted the latch, and stepped through. Still waiting for permission, she asked. Still your gate. Good answer. I've had practice. The woodshed needed only one final afternoon of work. 3 heavy rounds remained near the chopping block. Pieces Lydia had ignored because the earlier stacks were already sufficient. Martin set his axe against the wall, while Lydia reached for Thomas's blue-handled maul. The head sat tight where Martin had repaired it weeks before. The chipped paint had worn no smoother. Lydia was glad. Which one? Martin asked. Lydia pointed toward the cedar round with the deepest knot. That. You saved the worst for last. I saved it for partnership. That sounds suspiciously like free labor. You are learning. Lydia set the round upright and swung. The first blow bit shallow. The second opened a narrow seam. She adjusted her stance. Martin did not offer advice. On the third strike, the round split unevenly, one half falling into the straw. Martin picked it up and set the remaining piece square. Your turn, Lydia said. I thought partnership meant sharing difficulty. It also means knowing when someone else has the better axe. Martin took his tool. This is progress. Do not become proud. He split the cedar cleanly. They worked through the remaining rounds without hurry. No frost emergency. No withheld wagon. No merchant waiting to use hunger or cold against her. Just wood, breath, and the steady rhythm of work shared because both had chosen to be there. When the final piece was stacked, Lydia stepped back. One wall of the shed was filled nearly to the rafters. Smaller split wood stood along the side. Kindling occupied its own dry bin. Martin rested both hands on the top of his axe handle. Enough? Lydia looked over the stack. For winter and spring? Spring can solve its own problems. That sounds unlike you. I am trying recklessness in small amounts. Should I worry? Constantly. Martin smiled. Lydia leaned the blue-handled maul against the wall. Thomas's old tool had carried grief, necessity, memory, and anger in different seasons of her life. It had never asked to become a symbol. Perhaps that was why it worked as one. Martin placed his plain axe beside it. 2 handles, 2 histories, neither replacing the other. Lydia took his hand. Mrs. Harper asked me for help today. Ransom told me. Of course he did. He was pleased. Were you? Martin turned toward her. Yes, because she needed me. Because she knew you'd tell her the truth, even if the answer was boring. Lydia considered that. It was very boring. Best kind. You have strange standards. I'm marrying you. She gave him a warning look. Martin laughed. The sound no longer surprised her. Lydia stepped closer and kissed him once, warm and familiar. His free hand settled at her waist after she leaned into him. No hesitation born of uncertainty now, only the old habit of making room for choice. When they parted, he rested his forehead lightly against hers. "Supper?" he asked. "Yes. Anything I'm allowed to carry?" Lydia glanced at the 2 tools. "Leave them." Martin nodded. She closed the woodshed door, then slipped her fingers through his. Together they crossed the yard toward the house. Behind them, Thomas's blue-handled maul and Martin's plain axe rested side by side beneath the full winter stack. Ahead, lamplight glowed through the kitchen window, and neither of them had to surrender a single piece of themselves to call it home.